Hi everyone, thanks for joining our Solana and Crypto.com live video AMA today. My name is Maggie, I'm the head of marketing at Crypto.com, and I'll be once again hosting today's live stream. Recently, we have invited quite a number of DeFi projects to our AMA sessions. Quite a number of them are working really hard on delivering protocols and blockchains, trying to solve the existing limitations and issues that we're seeing and observing in the DeFi space. So same as the project that we have invited today, Solana. And we have got Dominic Tsang, their head of business development from Solana. He's going to be responding to some of the questions submitted by our communities earlier last week. If your question has been selected for today's live stream, that means you may have won a share of the prize pool that will be paid out in Solana token. So welcome, Dominic.
Hey, everyone.
Thanks so much for joining us today. Before we start off, Would you like to quickly introduce yourself and Solana as a project to us?
Yeah, 100%. So Dominic, I lead business development efforts down at Solana, and been with the team almost since its inception, so about 2 years now. So Solana is a layer one proof of stake scalability project. We're based out of San Francisco, and I believe our key idea here is that we believe that you can scale blockchains without using sharding, and by simply leveraging the hardware and bandwidth that's available in all sorts of devices we have nowadays.
Great. We've got a lot of questions to cover for today, so why don't we dive in? You have already sort of mentioned what Solana is and how you guys are different from other blockchain solutions that try to solve the issue of scalability. Would you like to elaborate a little bit more on that and to our Crypto.com communities exactly what Solana offer as a technology to different DeFi service provider out there that we are seeing?
Yeah, 100%. So I think, to answer that question, it probably helps for me to maybe share a bit of background on the team as well. So a lot of our founders and engineering team actually come from a lot of large Silicon Valley companies, have had years of experience in distributed networks, low-level hardware optimization and operating systems. Most notably, a lot of them have had pretty storied careers down at Qualcomm and built out a lot of the software that was basically between this 2G to 4G hypergrowth phase for mobile, like smartphone devices. And a lot of the software that they built during that time kind of grew from when smartphones were still relatively large devices through to, what we see nowadays, where we have over almost a billion smartphone devices across the world, and all of it uses a lot of the software that they built out. And because of this kind of background, which I think is a little bit different to what we've traditionally seen within the blockchain space, where they lean a little bit more towards academics or research-based approaches to actually pushing the boundaries and innovating on blockchain technology. Ours was very much so on low-level infrastructure optimization and hardware optimization. And we saw that hardware and bandwidth was ever improving. Chips are constantly getting smaller. The number of cores and devices are constantly getting higher and higher. And we saw this as an opportunity for blockchain to scale together with this. There's an insane amount of R&D and investment every day from tech companies purely just to optimize on these elements. And it just made sense to have blockchain take advantage of that as well. So in contrast, I'd say a lot of the other scalability projects out there today try to solve the scalability issue through sharding. And I think this is actually the research that they're doing and the work that they're doing towards this is super important, but it also adds a lot of technical complexity into the user experience, into the developer experience, and to some degree, it also compromises security as well, which we can dive into a bit later. So for us, we saw this opportunity as a way to increase throughput, reduce transaction fees, which are ridiculous nowadays, and also improve response times, because right now waiting 15 seconds for a transaction is not very realistic if we want to scale this out to a broader audience. So as of today, Solana is capable of doing about 50,000 transactions a second. We can do about 1 million transactions for $10 and block times around sub 400 milliseconds. So as soon as you send a message, the other side of the party can basically get a response or get some level of confirmation within half a second, which is a huge leap forward compared to what we're dealing with today.
And I'm going to jump one question because you have been already diving into the technology itself. And so without leveraging sharding, then you guys have implemented this new concept and technology called proof of history. Can you tell us a little bit more about that and the role it plays with the overall ecosystem of Solana?
Yep. So proof of history is basically a clock, a decentralized clock that Solana uses before consensus. And for those of you who are aware, one of the biggest challenges in distributed networks is actually agreeing on time. And even though it's not immediately apparent, Bitcoin is essentially, you could think of it as a clock that ticks every 10 minutes. And this is controlled by the difficulty adjustment, which generally changes, every few years or so. And then for proof of stake networks, we've got messaging overhead. So the way proof of stake networks work is, let's say I'm node A and you're node B. I'll see some message come through at time t+1, and you might see a message come through at t+3. What happens is we basically converse with each other and try to figure out what the real time is, whether I'm correct, whether you're correct, and what if we have differing times, then we can possibly coordinate to figure out what the average time is. And once we've agreed that, then we can kind of produce the next block. So the gating feature here is actually the block. Each time a block is produced, it indicates the network actually progressing. So, with the first solution, proof of work, it's, I think what Ethereum has done with proof of work is probably as far as you can go in terms of optimizations, reducing it from 10 minutes down to 15 seconds per block. And with proof of stake, the challenge there is that as you add more and more nodes into the network, typically what happens is you need to speak with more and more people to figure out what the ordering of events is and what the time is on the network. And as you can imagine, once you add more and more nodes, the overhead becomes significantly higher, and that negatively affects how long it takes to produce a block and get finality in a network. So proof of history for us as Solana is a way to basically create a cryptographic source of time that is unbiasable. And this is really powerful because when node A or node B receives a message from the network and it indicates a particular time, they no longer need to coordinate with their peers to figure out what the actual time of the network is, like what the objective time of the network is. Because they have proof of history, they can optimistically trust that real time was taken to generate these proofs, and it indicates real time passing. And by virtue of that, they can then produce their next block without waiting for the rest of the network. This is really powerful because it reduces messaging overhead and allows the network to basically progress and come to consensus afterwards. So fundamentally, that's the crux of it. And then on top of that, we add a lot of traditional network optimization techniques, which have been in distributed systems for years that leverage proof of history as well. But all of these things combined make Solana as fast and as cheap as it is today.
You have now mentioned a couple of times that sharding itself is complex, and then proof of history itself, because it can significantly reduces the overhead of communication between different nodes. Can you be a little bit more specific to our audience here today, exactly how sharding is way more complicated than leveraging proof of history?
Yeah, so the idea of sharding is that you split up your nodes into various segments, and they all take care of different parts, and they kind of work in parallel. And the idea is by splitting the workload, you can get more efficiency and throughput gains from it. But as a consequence of that, you essentially reduce the security of the network. So for those of you who are familiar with proof of stake systems, the security of proof of stake systems typically comes from an assumption that 2/3 of the nodes on the network, or 2/3 plus one of the nodes on the network, are honest, and less than 33% of the network are corrupt. Because if 33% of the network is corrupt, then they can potentially halt the network or execute some other attacks as well. So with Solana, we have one really large shard that can support thousands of nodes. And if you were to split thousands of nodes into smaller buckets, let's say 3 buckets of 333 nodes each, trying to corrupt 33% of 333 is significantly easier than corrupting, say, 1,000 nodes, just purely in terms of numbers. And as a result of that, it becomes easier to compromise a network. So that's one element of it. And there are solutions to this which Ethereum, other protocols like NEAR have implemented to tackle this, for randomly switching validator sets across shards, etc. But while these are probably going to be effective, the challenge is that it only serves to add more complexity to network. And this is mainly a problem because it affects composability. So let's say you have one application on one shard and another application on another shard. For them to communicate with each other, it becomes extremely difficult, but it also adds additional communication hops and additional communication overhead for a lot of these protocols. And part of the reason why DeFi has been as successful as it has been today on Ethereum is because Ethereum right now is one large shard, and it's really easy for, say, Aave to interact with Compound or Wi-Fi. And once we actually start moving to sharding, that becomes significantly more difficult. And it also could potentially increase the amount of fees if some of these applications are split across different shards. So our belief is that it's probably going to, number one, reduce the be detrimental to the user experience because they're going to get charged more fees. It's going to be not as easy to interact with, but even for developers as well, trying to code across and around all of this complexity just makes it more error prone, less secure, and more complex when it doesn't necessarily need to be. So for us, our solution was that we saw an opportunity where you could actually still retain the benefits of what you see in terms of composability today in Ethereum without having to compromise, without having to go towards sharding, and still retaining the key features of decentralization and censorship resistance.
Great, thanks for clarifying with a very clear answer on the differences between two technologies. I'm curious to learn more about the use cases and partnerships that have been accomplished so far. But before we move on to those questions, let's talk a little bit about the governance of Solana. As a still very new project, the governance is currently maintained by Solana Foundation. Can you share us the overall overview of the plan in terms of governance in the future? And are you optimistic about on-chain governance anytime soon?
Yeah, so I think, over the past few months, as we've kind of watched DeFi summer unfold, there's been, we've seen how powerful governance can be and how impactful it is when communities kind of come together and collaborate to figure out what is right, what isn't right, how changes should be made. And I think the core here is, community engagement and empowerment. And I think on-chain governance is kind of the holy grail of that. But fundamentally, we've seen a lot of successful coordination and a lot of good come from off-chain governance as well. So for us, the end goal is definitely on enabling on-chain governance. But in the short term, it's probably going to start with off-chain governance. And that's number one, to kind of get our community in the process of, I guess, in the flow of participating, understanding how they contribute and what the process looks like, and eventually transition to on-chain governance somewhere later down the track. And the reason why we want to start, well, gradually roll out on-chain governance is because I think we've also seen on-chain governance go wrong. I think, YAM was a pretty interesting example of that for those who have been following DeFi, where due to some bugs in their smart contract code, despite reaching consensus on on-chain governance, the proposal never passed because there was a bug in the code. And for us, we want to make sure that when we roll it out responsibly and everything's properly audited. And in the meantime, I think getting people used to the process and understanding how they can get involved is more critical. So you can probably expect on-chain governance to roll out in a couple of months in Solana, and it'll be a pretty clearly communicated and staged process.
Well, I totally agree that every community, big and small, new and young, takes time to mature as a whole, especially for decentralized governance, right? That is a really core component in it. So you have mentioned that on-chain governance probably a few months down the road. Might as well ask you. So, what is in the plan for Solana for the remaining 2020, and maybe let's look beyond 2021 as well. Tell us a little bit more about your short-term, near-term, and longer-term goals for Solana.
Yeah, for sure. So I think, over the next 6 to 12 months, definitely got our work cut out for us. But I think, DeFi is definitely a space which we've been interested in, even before the term DeFi was coined. So in our first pitch deck for Solana, actually, this was back in late 2017, maybe 2018. The pitch deck was like, Solana is going to be decentralized NASDAQ. And it's kind of funny how it's played out now, 3 years later. And we're kind of finally seeing this boom come out because we've got the infrastructure to do so. One of the key challenges with launching a new blockchain is basically building out the infrastructure and to actually enable DeFi. Having a fast performant blockchain is kind of step one, but there are a lot of other elements as well, which is leading to why DeFi has been so successful on Ethereum today. So I'd probably say, assets is definitely one thing. Ethereum has had the luxury of having most of the DeFi assets on its platform already, which has made things a lot easier. And then, I found this. And then on top of that, you've got liquidity. And DEXs in general haven't seen that much success just because there isn't sufficient liquidity. There is people don't like trading there because the spread's too high and the slippage is too high, and it just doesn't make sense, especially when there's centralized exchanges. Then there's transaction fees as well, but that's kind of separate. But you got things like oracles, and then you've got stable coins, and kind of all these things need to almost come together at the same time for DeFi to thrive. And it's pretty difficult. It's a pretty hard combination to bring together simultaneously. So I think for us, we've been pretty lucky. Obviously, for those who've been following Solana, you've probably seen that we recently announced some major partnerships with Serum, a derivatives exchange, who have one of the largest traditional and crypto market makers on board, Jump Trading, and also other partners like Terra, who are working on kind of stable coins and payment rails, and they're kind of bringing that to Solana. So, even I think just through those two projects alone, we've been able to tick some of those boxes, but there's still a lot of work for us to do. And the next 6 to 12 months is going to be focused on rolling out that infrastructure to tick all those boxes. So I think some ways we're thinking of doing that are, cross-chain bridges, from more trusted bridges like like multi-sig bridges for a set of 20 validators through to decentralized custody solutions like REN or TBTC, and then also integrating with a lot of the major stablecoins within the space. Creating the payment rails for people to successfully be able to support an exchange or some kind of market on top of Solana. So, and then obviously wallet integrations as well. I think a lot of the DeFi community, or a lot of in general, basically relies on MetaMask or Portis or Magic as a gateway to using decentralized applications. And for us to basically capture that market, we're going to need to be integrated natively in a lot of those protocols, or have equivalents to make it just as easy and just as familiar for new users to jump in.
Great. I realize I like to shuffle around the sequence today, because you just mentioned about your grand plans for Solana in the nearer and longer term future. I guess as a technology provider, a visible proof points for you guys would be prominent partnerships that you just mentioned, such as like those with Terra and the launch of the decentralized derivative exchange Serum. Why don't we jump on to talk a little bit about partnerships, which is also the area that I'm most interested in myself.
Sure. Yeah.
Like I find those projects that you guys have partnered on very exciting, also quite unique in the space for now. And as a newer player in the space, and with so much progress and traction that's been generated already, what are some of the key principles behind selecting the right strategic partnerships, at least for now so far?
Yeah, so I think we have taken a slightly different approach to a lot of the other layer ones that are coming out in the space. There are a lot of teams or a lot of layer ones that have raised vast amounts of money, and their approach to getting adoption and kind of, I guess, growing the blockchain space overall has been to take a little bit more of a considered but scattergun approach in terms of funding a large variety of teams and giving them the opportunity and the resources to experiment and to build what they're interested in. And they're not necessarily, they're obviously validating these teams' ability to, like, technical ability and the use case to some degree, but I think it's more it's more loose, and they just want to have hundreds of projects building on top of it. And similar to what we've seen on Ethereum, you just need one or two major projects to really gain traction, like, for example, Uniswap, and then you've suddenly got product market fit and a lot of users and a lot of usage. For us, I think at Solana, it's been a bit more of a selective approach in terms of how we think about growth, how we think about partners, and that's really come down to us having a lot of conversation with a lot of teams, figuring out what their pain points are, but also figuring out exactly what Solana's value add is. And to boil it down, Solana's value add is being orders of magnitude cheaper, faster, and more responsive than any other chain that exists out there. And to be fair, I think a lot of the projects in this space haven't seen enough adoption or product market fit where scalability is even a problem for them. Like if you look at DappRadar or some of the websites that kind of track user metrics, a lot of the applications that are ranking at the top there that aren't part of DeFi, for example, probably have like a few hundred or a few thousand users a day, and the number of transactions per second that you need to support that size of user base is relatively low. And to be honest, you could probably get away with that on Ethereum or maybe some other scalability projects, or like Cosmos that does a few hundred or a few thousand transactions a second. For Solana, the value add is for applications that, or ecosystems that have a large user base. For example, Terra has 1 million monthly active users, or decentralized exchanges or derivative exchanges like Serum, which have hundreds of thousands of users, and their value proposition there is to be able to enable high frequency trading and very liquid markets. And those are kind of the ecosystems where we have a real edge and we've really focused on over the past 2 years as we've kind of iterated and developed Solana. But beyond that as well, I think there's also a large room for many other applications, really any application. But the critical factor is, does that application have product market fit? And does that application genuinely need something as fast and as cheap and as scalable as Solana right now? So I think those are the questions we ask ourselves a lot. And we kind of combine that with Ali's teams really representing the ethos of blockchain, and Ali's teams really trying to add value to the space, or they really just mimicking something else and trying to create a token for short-term gain. So I think that's how we think about it at Solana, and fortunately enough, it seems like it's worked out well for us. As we gain a foothold in the market, I imagine we can probably loosen up a bit and be a little bit more open about how we approach growth and partnerships. But for now, this has been working really well, and I think there's still a little bit to go before we properly transition into a broader strategy for ecosystem growth.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think your strategy on keeping a very specific focal point at the early stage has definitely paid off, obviously. This, I think the next question is probably that our community would be very interested in, that I also don't know. What is the scope of Solana and Crypto.com's collaboration? Obviously, your token is now listed on our platform, but then is there anything that you're looking forward to achieving together in the future? So talking about large-scale project, I think, and I hope that Crypto.com falls under one of them.
Yeah, 100%. I think Crypto.com has been able to build out a huge community, and on top of that as well, it's been able to bridge that gap between traditional like mainstream users and making it accessible for them, making crypto accessible for them, right? You can just tell from the amount of people that use the cards that are issued by Crypto.com today for everyday purchases. I think that's a testament to how deep they've been able to penetrate into the everyday market and the broader market. So, in the short term, or as of right now, being able to enabling the Crypto.com users to be able to trade or leverage Solana tokens to make purchases, or basically have it as an on-ramp into the Solana ecosystem is a great first step. But behind the scenes, we're exploring a lot of other options as well. And I think there's a huge scope for kind of collaboration down the track. Nothing we can announce just yet, but hopefully when the time comes, we can share it with the community.
I think that should get the community excited enough for now. So why don't
Yeah,
we
for sure.
why don't we zoom out a little bit and talk about what everyone has been so fanatic about, which is everything DeFi, right? So what is I think we addressed quite a lot of that already. Like, how do you plan for Solana, like for DeFi, like particularly the current status right now? What kind of role do Solana want to play to lead
Yeah,
the
sure.
DeFi?
Yeah, so I think, you know, DeFi summer has proven a lot of things, and by all means, it's been a massive success. You know, we're seeing how powerful smart contracts are in
Mm-hmm.
DeFi. You know, being able to have programmable money is insanely powerful. You know, protocols like Wi-Fi that where you just simply deposit your funds, and um, by the nature of these smart contracts, they're able to create a protocol that automatically deposits and invests your funds in the places that offer the best yield automatically for you, you know, and you don't really need to do that. And no one, and at the same time, you still retain full custody of your funds. And I think, you know, it's kind of taken this massive boom for people to realize that these products are of value and aren't just a meme. And at the same time, you know, there's been other things that we've discovered along the way, you know, that it's obviously not scalable right now. You know, just even within the blockchain space, having the people dive into DeFi, we're already encountering issues with transaction fees, speed, um, making it basically unusable. Right? At some point, you know, there was a saying on crypto Twitter that, you know, participating in DeFi is for Ethereum whales, because you'd spend almost $50, like 50 US dollars, every time you wanted to like send a transaction on the network, which is insane, right? Like the idea of the promise of blockchain was to be able to send or make transactions or send funds or just, you know, um, what's the word for it? I forget, but remittance, that's the one. So like do international remittance um, in a fast, decentralized way, significantly cheaper than what traditional rails offer you. And you know, we saw very quickly that that wasn't really the case. As the users, as usage grows, it seems like traditional options or traditional rails are almost better than what was being offered by DeFi. I think that was a huge opportunity for us at Solana, given what we were trying to offer, and a lot of people kind of realized, we're reminded of the benefit of why scalability is so important. So for us, I think longer term, we see our role as being kind of the ultimate price discovery and digital asset trading platform for anything that people need. And we're already seeing large scale players, large scale market makers come on board to provide liquidity, because they see that, number one, there is user demand, and number two, for them to be able to provide liquidity, they can't be dealing with fees that are $50 per transaction or response times that take 15 seconds each. Because I think a good measure of what's fast enough is the speed at which news kind of comes out. And the speed at which news comes out is important is because those typically drive price fluctuations within the market. So for people to be able to provide proper liquidity and properly quote our accurate market prices, it needs to be fast enough to be able to keep up, or at least be faster than that. And that's why Solana made a lot of sense. So I think, you know, we want to be the platform that can support a lot of these digital assets, and hopefully provide a space where people can kind of trade in while retaining custody and while taking advantage of these concepts like programmable money.
Well, I think the it has been an interesting year for anyone to witness, right? So it's like everyone has been talking about DeFi, more like a sci-fi concept, right? For a few years, like why it's so much better than the existing system, until now has
Yeah.
been proved, like put in like a stress test. Then we realize, okay, we're not there yet. It still needs some time to be matured, but that is why a lot of the projects, including Solana, right now is receiving a lot of attention and tractions because especially end users are now hitting the roadblocks on like really specific user experience related difficulties, right? So I think, to me, I think it's a very healthy step uh, for how the space has evolved, given actually just a really short period of time. And hopefully this period of development can also showcase more of a mainstream uh, mass public the true capabilities of what DeFi is. Right?
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah. So, I mean, what like a ideal DeFi picture, a healthy one would look like to you in like say 2 years down the road? That is more like to ask you personally, I think. Yeah.
Yeah, so I think, there's definitely an opportunity to dream big here. And, if we were to be extremely ambitious and, very open-minded, I think there's an opportunity for these kind of marketplaces for DeFi to be something that could rival some like what we know as CME today. I think maybe 2 years is too soon for that. There's the technological shift, being able to deliver something on that scale as the CME within 2 years. But then there's also the mental shift as well. I think the mental shift is probably going to take the longer be the longer piece of all of this. But I'm optimistic that within the next 2 years, we could have the infrastructure to be able to enable something like that. And I think I think we can start building a whole new set of products, like financial products, that are an interesting merge of traditional finance and decentralized finance altogether. And I don't know exactly what that looks like. I'm not even going to pretend to know what that might look like. But I think there's a lot of space there to be played around with. And I'm super excited for it. And I think it's a huge value add as well. Like if we can replace remittance or just general payment transfers internationally with blockchain, and have stable coins integrated into like traditional banks, that's going to give a huge amount of it's it's going to put a huge amount of money back into the ecosystem that's currently being taken out. Like currently, I'd say like billions of dollars are basically spent on moving money around, and blockchain can basically reduce the inefficiencies there and put it back into the ecosystem, and hopefully have that money be reinvested elsewhere that can add more value for entities, individuals, whoever it may be.
Great. Let's talk about 5G, right? That's how we
Sure.
started
Yeah.
the conversations. So far, no blockchain-based projects have successfully deployed the 5G technology. What would you consider as the main reasons that hasn't happened yet? What would give you the confidence that Solana will be able to achieve that in the future?
Yeah. So there are, I think there are a select few projects that are interested in the 5G use case, and I think the difficulty with blockchain-based 5G is kind of some of the challenges that you face with any sort of enterprise adoption. Enterprises large entities that typically move relatively slow and don't have the same level of urgency that startups or smaller teams might have, nor the agility. So it's going to be, and obviously there's a lot of regulations involved and non-technical based factors that play a role in that. So I think that's part of the reason. So for us, we're particularly confident in this because I think a lot of our team come from Qualcomm, which is one of the leaders within the telecommunication space, and have spent a lot of their careers building out the infrastructure for these systems. So they understand it deeply, and they have specific knowledge, specific knowledge on how blockchain can be applied to solve some of these problems, and also the network to do so. So it's going to be slow moving. We probably don't expect Solana to be building anything within the 5G space, within the next few months. But over the next few years, I think there's a pretty good opportunity there, because one of the main challenges of 5G compared to 4G is that the range for a lot of the cell towers in 5G is significantly shorter, which means you need to deploy many more towers to be able to get sufficient coverage. And as you can imagine, trying to deploy all these towers isn't free. It requires a lot of labor in terms of installing this infrastructure. And the deployment costs are just really high. It takes time to get that level of coverage. So I think the opportunity here for 5G using blockchain is basically nodes as a service, where third parties or individuals can act as nodes that help, or cell towers, to help increase the density within developed areas and get sufficient coverage there. And the beauty about blockchain is you can basically automate the billing and a lot of the administrative costs that are associated with that as well.
I mean, that like traditionally, telecommunications is very much has its own system in different regions and geographic locations, and also payment and many different local providers, right? That sort of infrastructure setup is completely different from crypto per se. How do you envision you guys being able to participate or like really be able to add values in a highly fragmented systems to meet needs like in different locales per se?
Yeah, so I think there is no magic formula here. You just have to, I think for us, it's really just trying to understand exactly how each region is structured and where the opportunity is. In some areas, maybe there is no opportunity. I think the US is an area that we have the most experience in, just given the team's background. So that's definitely an area that we're focused on heavily. But there are definitely other regions as well where we're looking into and gradually researching as well. So it's a case by case. It's a case by case approach. Though ideally, where possible, we try to standardize it. The less we need to custom build things, the better it is for the entire space. But it is difficult to try and coordinate a lot of the big players together. And I guess that's part of its own challenge.
But who knows, right? Maybe in the future, it shouldn't be like that. And then I hope that you guys can continue to try to participate and contribute to change the status quo. I think it's a very important course for blockchain technology to chime in my opinion. All right,
Yeah,
I'm mindful of time, so let's wrap up our conversation with a topic probably that our community would care a lot, which is related to the Solana tokens. So let's touch on the topic of supply a little bit. Currently, first of all, I have not validated the numbers. Please correct me if I'm wrong. The total supply of Solana tokens is 500 million, and circulating supply at the moment is, do you have that number on top of your mind?
Yeah, so to clarify, total supply is 488 million, roughly. I'm rounding down to the closest million here. But that's because we burned 11 million tokens permanently from the total supply. And circulating supply as of today is 34 million tokens, roughly. So, between now and January 7th, 2021, we're looking to release another 8 million tokens each month. And at January 7th, 2021, we'll be doing a major unlock for any other tokens that are still locked up. And I think, it's a lot of people are curious as to why we've taken this sort of approach. And the reason for this is because I think we've seen a lot of projects do, periodic releases or periodic unlocks, and that hasn't necessarily been healthy for the growth of the ecosystem. Whereas what seems to have been the most successful is basically 100% unlocks all at once. And it's obviously it's a bit more difficult now because you've got demographics of users that are more short-term minded, not necessarily interested in the community and technology, and they're just looking for quick profit, which makes it harder. But what has been, you look at projects like Ethereum and Cosmos that were basically unlocked immediately from day one. I personally think they're shining examples of what successful projects look like. And within regulatory boundaries, we've tried to replicate the same thing, because getting good token distribution across basically the community is what seems to be very healthy for the ecosystem. Sure, in the short term or at the moment of the major unlock, that might affect the price negatively, but we think in the long term it's going to be beneficial.
All right, thanks. It's a very clear answer. Before we wrap off, given Solana is still relatively new as a protocol, what would you like to say to any of the developers who might be watching us today? How would you encourage them to use Solana and join the Solana community? Do you have any words for them?
Yeah, for sure. So we've got a bunch of on-ramps where people can kind of get involved. There's, Solana, if you're non-technical, there's Solana Collective, where you can jump in and, participate as an ambassador for Solana. Then there is our incentivized testnet, if you're interested in running a validator. There's also the Solana Accelerator program. So if you're a developer, you've got some ideas on things that you'd like to build and possibly looking for a grant from the Solana team, feel free to jump in there. And we don't bite, so feel free to join our Discord, join our Telegram groups, or just follow us on our socials. And we'd love to chat to you and see, either get to know you better or help answer some questions and see how we can kind of get you guys involved.
Great. I really enjoy the insights and all of the sharing that you have had with us today. Dominic, thanks so much. But bigger thanks to our community. I think the questions have been very on point. Before closing, Dominic, do you have any words for us that we haven't covered today, or particularly to our community, that you would like to share?
Honestly, just want to say thank you to the Crypto.com team for hosting today, and obviously to your wonderful community that's come in to listen to this live AMA. It's been a pleasure. It's always fun to be able to kind of share what's going on and engage in the broader community as well. So really enjoyed it. Thanks again.
Great. So last off, again, if any of the question, and sorry because we're running out a little bit, so I have skipped 1 or 2 questions here and there. But if your question has been featured earlier, that means you have won a share of the prize pool of Solana tokens, and we're gonna distribute directly to your Crypto.com account within the next weeks or so. But until then, follow our guest, Solana, on Twitter, and also follow Crypto.com, stay informed for all of the upcoming events and AMA through our Twitter, official Telegram channels. And lately, we have been putting our AMA on YouTube. So go and subscribe, and then so you can follow the upcoming AMAs. Thanks again, Dominic, for joining us today. Until next time.
Thank you, guys.